The desolate Montana plains stretched endlessly beneath a sky heavy with approaching winter, the last golden rays of autumn light washing over the lonely homestead where Sarah Mitchell stood on her weathered porch. Her thin shoulders squared against the bitter wind, her calloused hands gripping the worn railing as she watched another day fade into darkness. At 32, Sarah had buried more than most: her beloved husband James, her dreams of prosperity, and any illusions of family. Loyalty, all that remained was this struggling ranch, 3 hungry children who depended on her, and a ruthless winter threatening to claim what little they had left. The men who rode toward her property that evening, with rifles gleaming in the fading light, thought they'd found easy pickings, a desperate widow alone with 3 small children, the kind of vulnerable soul the lawless frontier created and forgot. What they couldn't know, what no one in Blackwater Valley could possibly suspect, was that tragedy had brought an unexpected guardian to Sarah's doorstep, a man whose own losses mirrored her own, a man whose very presence would rewrite her fate and challenge everything she thought she knew about survival, loyalty, and the unexpected bonds forged in the shadow of desperation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brittle October wind swept across Sarah Mitchell's small homestead, rattling the loose shutters on the west-facing windows. A storm was coming. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she'd learned to sense so many things since James's passing 8 months ago. Their modest 2-room cabin, once filled with her husband's laughter and ambitious plans, now felt vast and empty, despite housing her 3 children. "Mama, I'm cold," 5-year-old Emma whispered, tugging at Sarah's worn cotton skirt. The little girl's cheeks were flushed, her honey-blonde hair, so like her father's, pulled back in a simple braid. Sarah knelt down, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "I know, sweet pea. Go fetch your brother and sister from the barn. Supper's nearly ready and it'll warm you right up." As Emma scampered away, Sarah returned to the hearth where a thin stew simmered. Potatoes, the last of their carrots, and a meager portion of salted beef, hardly enough to satisfy 3 growing children, but it would have to do. The pantry shelves grew barer with each passing day, and her late husband's family had made their position painfully clear when she'd last ventured into town. "We've done our Christian duty," Walter Mitchell, her father-in-law, had declared from behind the counter of the general store he owned. "James made his choice when he dragged you and those children to that God-forsaken patch of dirt instead of joining the family business. We can't be expected to support his folly indefinitely." The set memory still burned. Sarah had stood there, hat in hand, 3 children clinging to her skirts, while the townsfolk of Blackwater pretended not to listen. She hadn't been asking for charity, merely requesting that her husband's half of his grandfather's inheritance be released to her, money that was rightfully her children's, money that could see them through the winter. "The law is clear," Walter had continued, his wife Agatha nodding vigorously beside him. "A widow has no claim on Mitchell family assets unless specified in writing. James left no will. His share reverts to the family trust." The cold satisfaction in his eyes had told Sarah everything. The Mitchells had never approved of James marrying. A poor schoolteacher with no social standing, and now they had the perfect opportunity to sever ties completely. The sound of the door opening pulled Sarah from her bitter recollections. Emma entered with 7-year-old Thomas and 3-year-old Lily in tow, their cheeks reddened from the cold. "Chickens are all tucked in," Thomas reported seriously. Since his father's death, he'd taken to mimicking James's mannerisms, trying so hard to be the man of the house that it broke Sarah's heart. "And I checked on Bessie. She seems better today." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. Their only milk cow had fallen ill 3 days ago, and losing her would be catastrophic. Good work, Thomas. Now all of you, wash up for supper. As the children gathered around the rough-hewn table James had crafted during Sarah's first pregnancy, she ladled out the stew, giving each child a portion larger than her own. The conversation flowed around her. Emma's discovery of a bird's nest, Thomas's plans to repair the chicken coop's door, Lily's detailed description of a cloud shaped like a rabbit, ordinary moments that were precious precisely because they were ordinary. Because they meant her children were still finding joy, despite everything they'd lost. After the meal, when the dishes were washed and the children tucked into the single bed they shared in the cabin's second room, Sarah wrapped herself in James's old coat and stepped onto the porch. The night sky stretched above her, a canvas of stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to touch. In the early days of their marriage, she and James would sit out here mapping constellations and planning their future. Now she searched those same stars for answers they refused to give. The first sign of trouble came just before dawn. Sarah, already awake and stoking the morning fire, heard Bessie lowing distressfully from the small barn. Grabbing James's old shotgun from above the door, loaded but rarely fired, she hurried across the frost-covered yard. The barn door stood slightly ajar, though she distinctly remembered securing it the night before. Heart-pounding, Sarah pushed it open with the shotgun barrel, prepared for the worst. A wolf, perhaps, or a desperate drifter. What she found instead was a man kneeling beside Bessie, his hands gentle as they examined the cow's swollen udder. He turned at her entrance, moving with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his powerful frame. In the dim lantern light, Sarah could make out copper skin, high cheekbones, and dark eyes that assessed her with equal parts caution and dignity. A Cheyenne. Sarah had seen members of the tribe occasionally in town, trading or passing through, but never this close, never alone on her property. Fear and uncertainty tangled in her chest, but she kept the shotgun steady. "What are you doing with my cow?" she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. The man rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his long, black hair falling in 2 neat braids over a buckskin jacket worn over what appeared to be partial American clothing, wool trousers and a faded blue shirt. "Your cow has milk fever," he replied in clear, accented English. "I was giving her medicine." Sarah blinked, surprised both by his perfect English and his diagnosis. "Milk fever?" He nodded, gesturing toward a small pouch at his waist. "Herbs. To bring down swelling, help her produce milk again. She will recover in 2 days if treated properly." Sarah lowered the shotgun slightly, confusion replacing fear. "Why would you help my cow?" Something shifted in the man's expression, a shadow of emotion quickly controlled. "I saw the children yesterday gathering eggs. The smallest one has a cough. Children need milk." The simple statement stunned Sarah into silence. Yes, Lily had developed a worrying cough 3 days ago, around the same time Bessie had fallen ill. But how had this stranger noticed? How long had he been watching her farm? "Who are you?" she finally asked, the shotgun now pointed at the ground. "My name is Daniel Hunter." The name was clearly American, not Cheyenne, a fact that registered dimly in Sarah's confused mind. "What are you doing on my property, Mr. Hunter?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips at her formal address. "Passing through, saw the sick cow, decided to help." His words were economical, his manner reserved. Sarah hesitated, torn between lingering wariness and practical need. If Bessie didn't recover, her children would suffer. "How do I know these herbs won't poison her?" "You don't," he replied frankly. "But why would I harm a cow that feeds children?" The logic was undeniable, as was the quiet dignity in his bearing. Sarah made her decision. "Show me what you're doing then. I should learn for next time." For the next hour, Daniel Hunter demonstrated how to prepare and administer the herbal remedy, explaining each step with patience. His hands, Sarah noticed, bore the calluses of hard work, but moved with surprising gentleness when tending to the ailing animal. Watching him work, she felt her initial fear dissipate, replaced by cautious gratitude. "Where did you learn about cattle sickness?" she asked as they finished the treatment. "Lived on a ranch, 5 years, worked as a hand." Again, that economy of words, as if each one cost him something to speak. Before Sarah could inquire further, Emma's voice called from the cabin doorway. "Mama, Thomas says there's a strange man in the barn." Sarah turned to find all 3 children peering anxiously from the cabin, Thomas protectively positioning himself in front of his sisters. "It's all right," she called back, making a split-second decision. "Mr. Hunter is helping Bessie feel better. He knows about sick cows." The children exchanged glances, their curiosity visibly battling with caution. Finally, Thomas stepped forward, his small shoulders squared in an unconscious imitation of his. "Father, is Bessie going to be okay?" he asked, addressing Daniel directly. Daniel looked at the boy, something softening almost imperceptibly in his expression. "Yes, your cow is strong, just needs medicine and rest." "Are you an Indian?" Emma blurted out, earning a sharp "Emma!" from her mother. Daniel nodded solemnly. "Cheyenne, from the northern tribes." "Do you live nearby?" Thomas asked, inching closer despite Sarah's instinct to pull him back. "No." A shadow crossed Daniel's face. "I travel now." Sarah sensed depths beneath that simple statement. Loss, perhaps, or some unspoken burden. Before she could ponder it further, little Lily, who had been hiding behind Thomas, suddenly darted forward with the impulsive trust of a 3-year-old. She stopped directly in front of Daniel and looked up, her small face solemn. "Thank you for helping our Bessie," she said, then extended her tiny hand exactly as Sarah had taught her to do when greeting adults. The moment hung suspended in the cool morning air. Sarah held her breath, watching as Daniel Hunter, this stranger, this Cheyenne warrior who had appeared from nowhere, looked down at her youngest daughter. Then, with infinite care, he crouched to Lily's level and gently shook her offered hand. "You are welcome, little one," he said, his deep voice softening to match her small stature. Something shifted in that moment. A boundary crossed, a possibility opened. Sarah couldn't have named it then, couldn't have possibly foreseen how this chance encounter would change everything. She only knew that when Daniel Hunter rose and announced he would return the following day to check on Bessie, she found herself nodding in agreement, the word "yes" falling from her lips before she could question its wisdom. As he walked away across her property with that same fluid grace, disappearing into the tree line as silently as he must have appeared, Sarah stood, with her children clustered around her legs, and felt, for the first time since James's death, the faintest stirring of something she'd thought lost forever, hope. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight spilling across the rolling grasslands surrounding Sarah's homestead. As she milked a visibly improved Bessie, her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious Cheyenne man, Daniel Hunter. The name itself was a contradiction, distinctly American paired with his unmistakably native features and manner. "Mama, is the Indian man coming back today?" Emma asked, helping to strain the fresh milk through cheesecloth. "His name is Mr. Hunter," Sarah corrected gently. "And yes, he said he would return to check on Bessie." Thomas looked up from where he was mending a basket at the kitchen table, his small fingers awkwardly weaving the reeds, as Sarah had taught him. "Pa said Indians can't be trusted." He paused, conflict evident on his young face. "But Pa also said to judge men by their actions, not their blood." Sarah felt a surge of pride amidst her grief. Even in death, James's principles lived on through their son. "Your father was right on both counts, Thomas. People are complicated. Mr. Hunter helped us when he didn't need to, and that speaks well of him. But we still must be careful." "Why? Does he talk like us?" Emma persisted, ever curious. "Most Indians in town don't speak English so good." "So well," Sarah corrected automatically, her teacher's instincts surfacing. "And I don't know. Perhaps he'll tell us if he returns." By midday, Sarah had begun to wonder if Daniel Hunter had reconsidered his offer. She was hanging laundry on the line, the children helping with smaller items, when Lily suddenly pointed toward the eastern ridge. "Look, it's the cow doctor." Sarah turned to see Daniel approaching on horseback, his straight-backed posture and the ease with which he controlled, his muscular pinto stallion speaking to years of horsemanship. As he drew closer, she noticed he carried something across his saddle, the limp form of a deer. He dismounted with fluid grace, leading his horse to the fence post where he secured the reins. "Your cow is better?" he asked without preamble. Sarah nodded. "Much. She gave almost a full pail this morning." Daniel's expression remained impassive, but Sarah sensed approval in his slight nod. He gestured to the deer. "For your family. Winter comes soon. You need meat." The unexpected gift momentarily robbed Sarah of words. Fresh venison would provide meals for days, and the hide, properly tanned, could be made into desperately needed winter clothing for the children. "That's very generous," she managed finally. "But why would you do this for strangers?" Daniel's dark eyes held hers steadily. "Not strangers now, neighbors." He gestured vaguely eastward. "I camp by the creek, 2 miles." This revelation surprised Sarah. She'd assumed he was passing through, not settling nearby, even temporarily. "Will you stay for a meal at least?" she offered, practical gratitude overcoming lingering caution. "I can butcher the deer, and you're welcome to share what you've provided." Something flickered in Daniel's expression. Hesitation, perhaps, or surprise at the invitation. After a moment, he inclined his head in agreement. What followed was an afternoon unlike any Sarah had experienced since James's death. Daniel expertly field-dressed the deer, demonstrating techniques that wasted nothing. Sarah worked alongside him, following his quiet instructions, while the children watched in fascination. His methods were different from the frontier butchering. She'd learned from James, more efficient, more respectful of the animal. "The deer gives its life so your children may live," he explained to Thomas, who had ventured closest. "We honor that gift by using everything: meat for strength, hide for warmth, sinew for tools." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Pa said something like that too, that we should thank God for the animals that feed us." Daniel's expression remained neutral at the mention of God, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "Many names for the same gratitude," was all he said. As Sarah prepared a venison stew with fresh herbs Daniel had brought, explaining each one's properties as she added them to the pot, she found herself studying their unexpected benefactor. In the daylight, she could better observe the contradictions he embodied. His clothing blended cultures, buckskin and wool, moccasins and a cotton shirt that had once been fine but was now carefully mended. A knife with an elaborately carved bone handle hung at his waist, alongside a more standard hunting knife common to white trappers. Around his neck, partially hidden by his shirt, she glimpsed a leather cord from which something hung, though she couldn't make out what. More telling were the scars, a long one along his forearm that disappeared beneath his sleeve, another visible at his collar. Old wounds, well healed but speaking of violence, survived. But it was his eyes that revealed the most, dark, intelligent, and haunted by something she recognized all too well. Loss, profound and life-altering. "You have questions," he said suddenly, catching her gaze as he helped Emma set the table, a task he performed with surprising familiarity. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks at being caught staring. "I'm sorry, it's just, you wonder why a Cheyenne speaks English like a white man, why he knows white ways." The directness was startling, but somehow refreshing after months of townsfolk speaking around difficult truths. "Yes," she admitted. "I do wonder." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his hands still moving efficiently as he arranged the mismatched plates Emma handed him. Finally, he spoke. "I was taken to the Eastern School when I was 8 winters, Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. They cut my hair, gave me this name, taught me to speak, read, write English." His tone remained neutral, factual, though Sarah sensed deep waters beneath the simple narrative. "Spent 10 years there, then worked on ranches in Wyoming Territory, married, had a son." The past tense hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her throat tighten with sudden understanding. "What happened to them?" she asked softly. Daniel's hands stilled momentarily. "Fever, 3 winters ago." Just 3 words, yet they contained a universe of grief Sarah understood intimately. "I'm sorry," she said, the inadequate phrase all anyone could offer in the face of such loss. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Your husband?" "Pneumonia, this past February. It took him in just 5 days. The pain still felt fresh, a wound that reopened with each telling. A moment of shared understanding passed between them, a bridge formed of common suffering. Then Lily tugged at Daniel's sleeve, demanding to be lifted to see what was cooking in the pot, and the moment passed. They ate together as the afternoon shadows lengthened, the conversation flowing more easily than Sarah would have thought possible. The children, initially shy, warmed to Daniel's presence, especially when he showed Thomas how to fashion a small wooden whistle from a branch and told Emma a brief Cheyenne legend about the stars that had her wide-eyed with wonder. "Will you tell us more stories?" Emma asked as they finished the meal. "About your people?" A shadow crossed Daniel's face. "They are not my people anymore." The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Sarah sensed complex currents beneath the simple declaration. Rejection, perhaps, or a deliberate separation. "Why not?" Thomas asked with a child's directness. Daniel considered the boy for a long moment. "The school changed me, made me walk between 2 worlds." He tapped his chest. "Not white enough for one world, too white for the other." The painful honesty of this assessment silenced them all briefly. Sarah found herself wondering what it must be like to belong nowhere, to exist in that painful in-between, not fully accepted by either culture. "Where will you go when you leave the creek?" she asked, changing the subject slightly. Daniel's expression revealed nothing. "Don't know yet. Winter first, then decide." After the meal, as Daniel prepared to leave, Sarah wrapped several portions of the venison stew for him to take. It seemed a paltry exchange for all he'd provided, but he accepted the offering with the same quiet dignity with which he did everything. As he mounted his horse, she found herself unexpectedly reluctant to see him go. His presence had filled the cabin with something it had lacked since James's death, not just the security of a man's strength, but a particular quality of attention, of being fully present in each moment. "You're welcome to visit again," she found herself saying. "The children would enjoy more stories." Daniel studied her face carefully, as if searching for the truth behind the invitation. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, for he nodded. "Once, I will come in 2 days, bring more medicine for the cow, make sure it lasts through winter." As he rode away, Sarah felt an odd mixture of relief and anticipation. The lines of her carefully circumscribed world, already redrawn by widowhood, were shifting again with this unexpected connection. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat by the dying fire and allowed herself to wonder about the man who called himself Daniel Hunter. What other sorrows lay beneath his reserved exterior? What forces had shaped him into this solitary figure, neither fully of the white world nor the Cheyenne? And what twist of fate had brought him to her homestead precisely when she needed help the most? She couldn't know then that these questions would soon be overshadowed by more urgent concerns, that Daniel Hunter's presence in their lives would draw unwelcome attention, or that the tenuous peace of their existence was about to be shattered by men whose greed recognized no boundaries of decency or compassion. As embers glowed in the hearth, Sarah added another small log to keep the chill at bay. Outside, the vast Montana night pressed against the window glass, stars wheeling above the lonely homestead where a widow and her children slept, unaware that forces were already in motion that would test their resilience in ways they couldn't imagine. 2 miles away, beside a small creek sheltered by cottonwoods, Daniel Hunter sat before his own fire, studying the flames as if they held answers to unasked questions. His hand occasionally drifted to the leather cord around his neck, fingers tracing the object that hung there. A small carved wooden horse, made by hands now long stilled. The last gift from a son who would never grow to manhood. The promised. 2 days passed quickly. Sarah found herself watching the eastern ridge more often than necessary, anticipating Daniel's return with a mixture of practical gratitude and something less easily defined. His visits had already made a tangible difference in their circumstances. Bessie was fully recovered, the venison had been preserved for winter, and the children spoke of him with growing familiarity. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sarah hitched the wagon and prepared for her monthly trip into Blackwater. These expeditions had become increasingly difficult since James's death, with each visit to town reinforcing her isolation and the Mitchell family's rejection. "Can Mr. Hunter come with us?" Emma asked, climbing into the wagon. Sarah shook her head. "It wouldn't be wise, sweet pea. Some people in town, they wouldn't understand." Thomas, helping Lily onto the bench seat, looked up sharply. "Because he's Indian?" Sarah sighed, uncertain how to explain the complex prejudices of Blackwater to children who, isolated on their homestead, had been largely sheltered from such ugliness. "Partly that," she acknowledged, unwilling to lie, "and partly because people talk. A widow spending time with any man, regardless of who he is, invites gossip." Thomas's face scrunched in confusion. "But he just helps us. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing," Sarah assured him, taking up the reins. "Absolutely nothing. But not everyone sees things as clearly as you do. The journey into town took nearly 2 hours, the wagon bumping along the rutted trail that served as the main road connecting outlying homesteads to Blackwater. The settlement itself was modest by any standard. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church whose steeple needed painting, and scattered homes radiating outward in diminishing quality the further they were from the town center. Mitchell's general store dominated the main street, its fresh paint and large windows broadcasting Walter Mitchell's prosperity to all who passed. Sarah felt the familiar knot form in her stomach as she pulled the wagon to a stop before it. She had just enough money for absolute essentials: flour, coffee, sugar, and a bolt of wool fabric to make winter clothes for the rapidly growing children. "Remember," she cautioned as they climbed down, "best behavior inside Grandfather Mitchell's store." Emma nodded solemnly, while Thomas squared his small shoulders, a muscle working in his jaw in a manner so reminiscent of James that Sarah's breath caught. Only Lily, too young to fully grasp the family dynamics, bounced with excitement at the prospect of seeing the store's treasures. The bell above the door announced their arrival. The store was busy with the usual Saturday morning trade: farmers' wives examining fabrics, ranch hands purchasing tobacco, a cluster of men near the pot-bellied stove discussing cattle prices. Conversation didn't quite halt at their entrance, but it faltered noticeably before resuming at a lower volume. Agatha Mitchell stood behind the counter, her thin frame made severe by a high-necked dress in unrelenting black, a mourning colour. She'd adopted after James's death, though her expression had never conveyed actual grief. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Sarah and the children. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sarah greeted her mother-in-law with carefully neutral politeness. Sarah, Agatha returned stiffly, her gaze sliding to the children. Her features softened marginally. Children. This was the extent of their relationship now. Formal acknowledgement without warmth. Walter emerged from the storeroom, his substantial frame filling the doorway. Unlike his wife, he made no attempt at pleasantries. "Monthly supplies?" he asked. Curtly. "Yes," Sarah replied, handing him the short list she'd prepared. Walter scanned it, his mouth tightening. "No credit." "I have money," Sarah responded, the words costing her pride she couldn't afford. As Walter begrudgingly gathered her items, Sarah noticed Emma had wandered toward a display of ribbons, her small fingers hovering reverently above a blue satin, one that matched her eyes. "Don't touch what you can't afford," Agatha snapped, causing Emma to jerk her hand back as if burned. Sarah bit the inside of her cheek to keep from responding. Instead, she shepherded her children toward the barrel of hard candy near the counter, allowing each to select one piece, a tiny luxury that would need to last them until next month. While waiting for Walter to complete her order, Sarah became aware of conversation at the stove, fragments floating toward her. "Damn Indians spotted near the Henderson place? Not right. A savage that close to decent folk. Should run him off before there's trouble." Sarah tensed, keeping her expression neutral while straining to hear more. The Henderson farm was only 3 miles from her homestead, in the same direction as the creek where Daniel had made his camp. "Heard he helped the Miller boys when their wagon broke down," a quieter voice added. "Fixed the axle, refused payment. Probably scouting for a raid," another countered dismissively. "You know what happened to the Crawfords last year, 60 miles north? Whole family massacred." "That was Blackfoot, not Cheyenne," the moderate voice argued. "And this one keeps to himself, travels alone." "Indian's an Indian," came the stubborn reply. "Can't trust any of them." Walter returned with Sarah's supplies, naming a price that was slightly higher than she'd calculated. She considered challenging it, then thought better of creating a scene. As she counted out precious coins, Walter leaned forward, his voice pitched low. "I hear you've had a visitor at your place." "An Indian." Sarah's head snapped up, meeting her father-in-law's calculating gaze. "News travels fast," she said carefully. "Small community," Walter replied. "Henderson's boy saw him riding toward your property twice. He helped when Bessie was sick," Sarah explained, aware that the store had grown quieter, other customers straining to overhear. "He's knowledgeable about cattle." Walter's expression darkened. "You're allowing a savage near my grandchildren." Possessive claim was rich, coming from a man who had effectively abandoned those same grandchildren to potential starvation. Sarah felt a flash of uncharacteristic anger. "Mr. Hunter has shown more concern for your grandchildren's welfare than their own grandparents," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He brought us venison for the winter when we had little to eat." A murmur ran through the store. Walter's face flushed an ugly red. "Hunter? He has a white man's name?" "He was educated at Carlisle," Sarah replied, gathering her purchases. "He speaks better English than most in this town, and has shown nothing but kindness to my family." "Your family?" Walter hissed, leaning closer. "Those children are Mitchell's, my son's legacy, and you're exposing them to a savage, probably inviting him into your home. That's enough." The quiet authority in Sarah's voice surprised even her. "I've made my purchases. We'll be going now." As she ushered the children toward the door, Agatha stepped forward, catching Thomas's arm. "You should come stay in town," she said, her voice suddenly honeyed. "The children could have proper schooling. It's what James would have wanted." Thomas looked up at his grandmother, then at Sarah, confusion evident in his young face. "We're staying on our land," Sarah said firmly, "as a family, as James and I planned." Agatha's fingers tightened on Thomas's arm. "Think of the children, Sarah. Winter's coming. That cabin is drafty, isolated, dangerous. especially with Indians roaming about. Be reasonable. Sarah recognized the strategy immediately. Having failed to force her off the land by withholding financial support, the Mitchells were now attempting to separate her from her children, using safety concerns as justification. "My children stay with me," she stated, gently but firmly removing Thomas from Agatha's grasp. "Good day, Mrs. Mitchell." Outside, Sarah loaded their supplies with hands that weren't quite steady, anger and fear tangling in her chest. The confrontation had been inevitable. Blackwater was too small for Daniel's presence to go unnoticed, but its intensity had caught her off guard. "Mama," Thomas asked as they climbed onto the wagon, "why doesn't grandmother want us to stay at our home?" Sarah measured her words carefully, conscious of 3 pairs of eyes watching her. "Your grandparents worry about us being alone, especially with winter coming. But our home is our home, Thomas. It's where your father built a life for us. And it's where we'll stay." "Because of the Indian man?" Emma asked. "Is that why they're angry?" "Partly," Sarah admitted, unwilling to shield them from unpleasant truths they'd eventually discover. "Some people fear what's different or what they don't understand." "Is Mr. Hunter dangerous?" Lily asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart," Sarah assured her with more confidence than she'd felt when Daniel first appeared in their barn. "He's been nothing but kind to us." As they started the journey home, Sarah became uncomfortably aware of eyes following their departure, not just from the general store, but from along the street. Word had traveled quickly about Daniel's visits to their homestead. The attention made her uneasy, awakening instincts that had lain dormant during her years as a respectable married woman. They were halfway home when Thomas spotted riders approaching from the north. 3 men on horseback, moving at a purposeful pace that immediately set Sarah on alert. "Get down on the floor of the wagon," she instructed the children, pulling the team to a stop. "Stay quiet." Thomas helped his sisters down, then looked up at Sarah with eyes too old for his years. "Is it because of Mr. Hunter?" he whispered. Before Sarah could answer, the riders were upon them, Logan Burke and his 2 sons, Jerome and Caleb. The Burkes owned the largest cattle operation in the county, their grazing rights frequently encroaching on smaller homesteads. James had often locked horns with them over boundary disputes. "Mrs. Mitchell," Logan called, reining in his horse beside the wagon. At 60, he remained imposing. A bull-necked man with a silver-streaked beard and cold eyes. Quite a journey for a woman alone. "Mr. Burke," Sarah acknowledged, her hand drifting to the small derringer hidden in her pocket. James's parting gift before his final illness. "We're managing fine, thank you." Logan's gaze drifted to the wagon bed where the children huddled. "Heard you've been entertaining an unusual visitor, Cheyenne fellow." The directness didn't surprise her. Logan Burke had never been one for subtle approaches. "Mr. Hunter helped when our cow was sick," Sarah replied evenly. "He's been a good neighbor." Jerome, the older son, spat onto the ground. "Good neighbor? An Indian? That's rich, Mrs. Mitchell." Sarah kept her focus on Logan, recognizing him as the real threat. "Was there something specific you wanted, Mr. Burke?" Logan leaned forward in his saddle. "Just some friendly advice. Blackwater's a civilized town now. We don't take kindly to savages in our midst, especially ones who get too comfortable with white women." The implication made Sarah's cheeks burn, but she kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate your concern, but my family's associations are our own business." "Not when they threaten the safety of the community," Logan countered, his tone hardening. "That Indian should move on. Today, make sure he gets the message." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his sons following suit. As they rode away, Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter left her shaken. not just by the veiled threat, but by how swiftly news had traveled and opinions formed. "Can we get up now?" Emma asked from the wagon bed. "Yes, sweetheart." Sarah helped them back onto the seat, her mind racing. She needed to warn Daniel about the mounting tensions in town, advise him to be especially cautious. The thought of him, encountering the Burkes or others like them, filled her with dread. As they crested the final rise before their homestead came into view, Sarah's heart sank. 2 riders were approaching their cabin from the east, from the direction of Daniel's camp. Even at this distance, she recognized the distinctive silhouette of Logan's younger son, Caleb. The Burkes had split up after encountering her on the road. While Logan and Jerome continued to town, Caleb had circled back toward her property, toward where Daniel might be. "Hold tight," she told the children, snapping the reins to urge the team faster. As the wagon lurched forward, Sarah could only hope they weren't already too late. Sarah urged the horses faster than was wise along the rutted trail, the wagon bouncing and swaying dangerously. The children clung to the sides, eyes wide with fear at their mother's unusual recklessness. "Stay with the wagon," she instructed as they pulled into the yard. "No matter what you hear, don't come out until I call for you." The scene before her cabin struck her with the force of a physical blow. Daniel Hunter stood with his back to the cabin wall, facing Caleb Burke, who sat astride his horse, rifle pointed casually but unmistakably in Daniel's direction. Daniel's own horse was nowhere in sight, and his stance, straight-backed but cautious, suggested he'd been caught by surprise while waiting for Sarah's return. "He'd told you we don't want your kind around here," Caleb was saying, his young face flushed with the peculiar mix of fear and bravado that made him dangerous. At 22, he was the most hot-headed of the Burkes, known for settling disputes with his fists rather than words. "This is not your land," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the rifle aimed at his chest. "Nor your decision." Sarah climbed down from the wagon, moving deliberately to ensure Caleb saw her approach. "Lower that rifle, Caleb Burke," she called, her teacher's voice cutting through the tension. "You're trespassing on my property." Caleb's head jerked toward her, his expression flickering with uncertainty before hardening again. "Mrs. Mitchell, just having a conversation with your friend here with a rifle." Sarah positioned herself halfway between the 2 men, heart pounding but voice steady. "Seems a peculiar way to converse." Caleb shifted in his saddle. "My pa says this Indian needs to clear out. He's not welcome in Blackwater." "Mr. Hunter is my guest," Sarah stated firmly, "and your father has no authority over who visits my home." "A woman living alone doesn't always make the best judgments," Caleb replied, his condescension grating despite his youth, especially where her children's safety is concerned. Sarah felt, rather than saw, Daniel tense behind her. "My judgment is perfectly sound, Mr. Burke. Now I'll ask you once more to leave my property." Caleb's expression turned ugly. "Or what? You'll set your pet Indian on me?" Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door creaked open. Thomas stood in the doorway, James's old shotgun clutched in his small hands. Though far too young to handle such a weapon effectively, the sight was startling enough to make Caleb hesitate. "Thomas!" Sarah gasped. "Put that down this instant!" "Pa said to protect you if he couldn't," the boy replied, his voice trembling but determined. The shotgun wavered in his grasp, its muzzle dipping toward the ground before he struggled to raise it again. Caleb barked a laugh, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "Look at that, the little man of the house. Thomas, inside. Now." Daniel's voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. To Sarah's amazement, Thomas immediately obeyed, lowering the shotgun and retreating into the cabin. Daniel stepped forward, moving so subtly that Caleb didn't immediately register that he was now within reaching distance of the horse's bridle. "The boy should not have to defend his mother," he said, his gaze locked on Caleb's. "That is men's work. Your father raised you to threaten women?" The question, delivered without heat but with unmistakable challenge, struck at Caleb's self-image. He flushed darker, shifting his grip on the rifle. "I'm protecting the community from savages who—" "You are a young man with much to prove," Daniel interrupted, his calm assessment more effective than any insult. "But this is not the way. Go home. Tell your father the widow and her children are under my protection now." The declaration hung in the air, its implications sending a jolt through Sarah. Daniel had just positioned himself as her defender, a role that would place him directly in conflict with the most powerful family in the county. Caleb's expression shifted through confusion, anger, and finally a grudging reassessment of the situation. Something in Daniel's steady gaze seemed to penetrate the young man's bravado. "This isn't over," he muttered, lowering his rifle and wheeling his horse around. "Pa won't stand for an Indian making threats." "Not threats," Daniel corrected. "Promise." They watched in silence as Caleb rode away, dust rising behind his horse's hooves. Only when he disappeared from view did Sarah release her breath, her knees suddenly weak with fading adrenaline. "Thomas should not have the gun," Daniel said, his voice gentler now that the danger had passed. "No, he shouldn't," Sarah agreed, gathering herself. "James showed him the basics last year, but he's far too young. I keep it unloaded." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "Brave boy. Like his father." The simple assessment brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "Why were you here?" she asked, changing the subject. "We were supposed to meet tomorrow. Felt watched at Creek Camp," Daniel explained, gesturing eastward. "Moved higher into hills. Came to warn you. Burke men asking questions at other homesteads." "Encountered them on the road," Sarah confirmed, moving toward the cabin to check on her children. "The entire town knows you've been visiting," Daniel followed, his moccasins soundless on the hard-packed earth. "Not safe for you now." Sarah paused at the cabin steps, turning to face him. "What do you mean?" "Association with me brings trouble. Should go." The simple statement sent an unexpected pang through Sarah's chest. In the short time since Daniel had appeared in their lives, his steady presence had become a source of security she hadn't realized how much she'd come to rely on. "Is that what you want?" she asked carefully. Daniel's dark eyes met hers, something unreadable flashing in their depths. "What I want and what is best are different things." Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door flew open and Emma burst out, followed by Lily and a chagrined-looking Thomas. "You're not leaving, are you, Mr. Hunter?" Emma demanded, rushing down the steps to stand before him, her small face set in determination. "Thomas says you're going away because of the bad man with the gun." Daniel knelt to Emma's level, his expression softening in the way it only did with the children. "Your mother decides who stays or goes on her land." "Then you'll stay," Emma declared confidently, turning to Sarah. "Won't he, Mama? He brings us meat and tells the best stories and makes Thomas smile again." Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks at her daughter's transparent plea and the expectant gazes of all three children. Their quick attachment to Daniel had surprised her, especially Thomas, who had withdrawn into stubborn silence for months after James's death. Somehow, the quiet Cheyenne had connected with her son in ways Sarah hadn't been able to. "Mr. Hunter has his own life, Emma," she began carefully, "his own decisions to make." "But he said you decide," Emma persisted with a child's relentless logic, "and we need help with winter coming. Pa always said winter's not for being alone." Sarah met Daniel's gaze over her daughter's head, reading the complex emotions there. Concern, resignation, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "The Burkes won't let this rest," she said quietly. "Their pride won't allow it." Daniel nodded once, understanding the warning. "I know these men, have seen their kind before." "Then you understand the danger, not just to yourself, but to us by association." Sarah hesitated, aware of the children listening intently. Perhaps it would be safer if you moved on. The words cost her more than she'd expected. Daniel rose to his full height, towering over them all, his face unreadable again. Safer, yes, he agreed, but you would face winter alone. No meat, no protection. He glanced at Thomas, who was watching him with poorly concealed distress. The boy needs teaching. The safe path is not always the right path. The echo of James's own philosophy, that doing what was right often meant doing what was difficult, wasn't lost on Sarah. She smoothed her skirt, buying time to collect her thoughts. If you stayed, she said carefully, it would need to be proper. People already talk. The children's reputation. Son, I will build shelter, Daniel interrupted, understanding immediately. Near enough to help, far enough for propriety, relief, and something warmer flooded through Sarah. The old trapper's cabin on the north edge of our property, she suggested. It needs work, but the basic structure is sound. Daniel inclined his head in agreement. I will repair it. Be close but separate. His gaze softened as he looked at the children. Teach the boy to hunt, not to hold guns too big for him. Thomas's face lit up, years of sorrow briefly eclipsed by boyish excitement. Really? You'll teach me like Pa was going to? If your mother permits, Daniel replied, looking to Sarah for confirmation. She nodded, knowing James would have approved. Her late husband had planned to teach Thomas all the skills a frontier man needed: hunting, tracking, building. His sudden death had left that education unfinished, a gap Sarah couldn't fill despite her best efforts. There's the root cellar to finish before snow flies, she added practically. And the barn roof needs patching. I will help, Daniel agreed. In exchange for a place to winter, the arrangement sounded reasonable, practical, a fair exchange of skills and security that would benefit both parties. Yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a threshold beyond which nothing would be the same. The Burkes will make trouble, she warned again. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. I have faced worse than ranchers with pride. As the children cheered the decision, running circles around the adults in their excitement, Sarah found herself studying Daniel's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar near his temple, the watchful eyes that missed nothing. He remained an enigma in many ways, a man whose past contained depths of experience and suffering she could only guess at. Why? She asked quietly, when the children had run off to show Daniel the trapper's cabin. Why risk trouble for a widow and 3 children who are nothing to you? Daniel turned to her, something fierce and protective flashing in his eyes. Not nothing, he corrected. The children laugh again in your home. After my family was taken, I found no purpose. Now I have one. The simple declaration, delivered without embellishment or sentiment, resonated with Sarah's own experience of grief, the desperate need to find meaning beyond survival, to rebuild purpose from the ashes of loss. Then we have an agreement, she said, extending her hand as she would to any business arrangement. Daniel hesitated, then took her offered hand. His palm was calloused against hers, warm and enveloping. The contact lasted only a moment before. He released her, but Sarah felt the impression of his touch linger like a promise. As they walked toward the trapper's cabin, where the children waited, Sarah was acutely aware that she had just altered the course of all their lives. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined with Daniel Hunter's, and with whatever shadows from his past still haunted him. The decision was practical, necessary for their survival through the approaching winter. Yet as she watched Daniel examine the cabin with the children, eagerly pointing out features, Sarah couldn't deny the other, less practical reason for her choice, the inexplicable sense of rightness she felt in his presence, as if a missing piece had been restored to their broken family circle. Winter was coming, and with it, challenges she could only dimly foresee. But for the first time since James's death, Sarah faced the future with something beyond grim determination. A cautious, fragile hope. October yielded to November with startling swiftness, the Montana landscape transformed by frost and increasingly bitter winds. Daniel worked with single-minded focus, his strong hands repairing what nature and neglect had damaged. The trapper's cabin, little more than a shell when he began, now stood weatherproofed and sturdy, its chinked logs keeping out the wind, its stone fireplace drawing properly after he rebuilt the collapsed chimney. Sarah watched the transformation with quiet amazement, not just of the cabin, but of her homestead. The barn roof no longer leaked, the root cellar had been deepened and properly shored up, and a substantial woodpile stood neatly stacked beside both cabins, enough to see them through even the harshest winter. More remarkable was the change in her children. Thomas had blossomed under Daniel's patient tutelage, learning to set snares for rabbits, to identify animal tracks, to use a knife safely for practical tasks. The boy, who had been drowning in premature responsibility, now moved with growing confidence. His grief no less real, but no longer all-consuming. Emma had appointed herself Daniel's official assistant, following him about the homestead with solemn determination, handing him tools and peppering him with endless questions that he answered with surprising patience. Even little Lily had formed a special bond with him, often falling asleep against his side during evening storytelling sessions. Only the increasingly frequent visits from the Burkes and their ranch hands cast shadows over their fragile contentment. Never overtly threatening, these neighborly calls carried the weight of surveillance and unspoken intimidation. The message was clear. Daniel's presence had been noted, his integration into Sarah's household disapproved of, his every movement monitored. On a crisp morning in mid-November, Sarah stood at her kitchen window watching Daniel chop wood, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The easy rhythm of the axe rising and falling, the precise placement of each stroke, spoke of a lifetime of physical labor transformed into unconscious grace. "Mama, can I take Mr. Hunter some coffee?" Emma asked, already reaching for a tin cup. "He's been working since before sunrise." Sarah smiled at her daughter's transparent eagerness. "Yes, but put your coat on first. The wind has teeth today." As Emma bundled up and carefully carried the steaming cup outside, Sarah turned her attention to the bread dough she was kneading. Flour dusted her forearms, a smudge of it lightly decorated her cheek, and her hair had escaped its practical bun to curl around her face in the kitchen's humidity. She was acutely aware of how different she looked from the prim schoolteacher who had first caught James Mitchell's eye, how the frontier had gradually stripped away the veneer of gentility, revealing something more elemental beneath. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention back to the window. 3 riders approached from the west, Walter and Agatha Mitchell, accompanied by Sheriff Collins. Sarah's hands stilled in the dough, apprehension settling like a stone in her stomach. Daniel had noticed too. He set down the axe and gently directed Emma back toward the house, his posture alert but not alarmed. He waited as the riders approached, positioning himself subtly between them and the cabin. Sarah wiped her hands and stepped onto the porch, just as the visitors reached the yard. Walter dismounted first, then awkwardly helped Agatha down from her side saddle. The sheriff remained mounted, his weathered face impassive beneath his hat brim. "Sarah," Walter greeted her stiffly, ignoring Daniel completely, "we need to speak with you." "What brings you all this way?" Sarah asked, maintaining a neutral tone while noting how Agatha's gaze darted between her and Daniel, cataloguing their proximity with visible disapproval. "Family matters," Walter replied pointedly. "Perhaps we could speak privately." Sarah crossed her arms, the November chill seeping through her thin house dress. "Anything you have to say can be said here." Walter's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, The sheriff cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've received some concerns about your situation out here," Sheriff Collins said, his tone professionally detached. "Your father-in-law feels—" "We feel," Agatha interrupted, stepping forward, "that it's inappropriate for a young widow to be living in such isolation, especially with an arrangement like this." Her gaze flicked dismissively toward Daniel. "People talk, Sarah. Think of the children's reputation." The implication was clear, and Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. "Mr. Hunter lives in the trapper's cabin," she stated evenly. "He's helped prepare our homestead for winter in exchange for a place to stay. There's nothing improper about it." "An unmarried man and woman living in such proximity invites speculation," Walter countered. "Add to that his background." "His background?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "You mean the fact that he's Cheyenne, or that he's more educated than half?" "The men in Blackwater." Sheriff Collins shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Mrs. Mitchell, no one's making accusations. But your in-laws have raised legitimate concerns about the children's welfare." "The children are thriving," Sarah replied, struggling to keep her voice level. "They're well-fed, warm, and safe. For now," Agatha said ominously. "But winter hasn't truly arrived yet. What happens when you're snowed in for weeks with dwindling supplies? What happens if you fall ill?" Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door opened and Thomas stepped out, followed by his sisters. He moved to stand beside Sarah, his young face a study in contained emotion. "We're not leaving our home," he announced, with quiet certainty. "Pa built this place for us." Walter's expression softened marginally as he regarded his grandson. "Thomas, we're thinking of your welfare. Town offers advantages, proper schooling, church, friends your own age. I'm learning more from Mr. Hunter than I ever did in town school," Thomas replied stubbornly. "He teaches me what Pa would have." Walter's gaze hardened again, shifting to Daniel, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Is that so? And what exactly are you teaching my grandson, Indian?" Daniel met Walter's hostile stare without flinching. "To hunt, to track, to respect the land." His voice remained calm, without defensiveness. "To be a man his father would recognize." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Sarah saw something flicker in Walter's expression, a grudging recognition, perhaps, that James might indeed have approved of such practical education for his son. Agatha, however, wasn't moved. "This is absurd. These children need proper Christian upbringing, not wilderness skills from a—" "Mr. Hunter reads Bible stories better than Reverend Phillips," Emma interjected earnestly. "He knows all the words, even the hard ones." Sarah bit back a smile at her daughter's artless defense, while Daniel's expression remained carefully neutral. She knew he had indeed been reading to the children from her family Bible, another unexpected facet of this complex man. Sheriff Collins cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Mitchell, no one can force you to leave your property, but your in-laws have filed a formal petition for guardianship of the children." The statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. "They've what?" "It's for their own good," Walter said, not quite meeting her eyes. "The hearing is set for December 15th in Helena. The judge will determine if they're better served remaining here or coming to live with us in town." "You can't do this," Sarah whispered, her voice failing her. "They're my children." "James's children," Agatha corrected coldly. "Mitchell blood. We have rights." Daniel took a step forward, his movement drawing all eyes. "The law recognizes a mother's claim," he said quietly, "unless she is unfit." Sheriff Collins nodded reluctantly. "That's true. The petition alleges unsuitable living conditions and questionable moral arrangements." Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. The Mitchells weren't merely disapproving of Daniel's presence, they were using it as legal leverage to take her children. "I've done nothing." Wrong, Sarah said, her voice strengthening with indignation. Nothing improper has occurred here. That may well be, the sheriff acknowledged, but the judge will consider the appearance of impropriety, especially given. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Given that he's Indian, Sarah finished flatly. Given that we're offering the children a stable home in town, Walter countered. Education, social standing, opportunities this isolated homestead can't provide. Thomas pressed closer to Sarah's side. We won't go with you, he declared, his voice trembling slightly. You never even visit us. You don't care about us. Thomas, Sarah admonished gently, though her heart swelled with fierce pride at his loyalty. Walter's face darkened. The boy needs discipline, structure. This wild existence has made him disrespectful. The boy, Daniel said quietly, honors his father's memory by protecting his mother and sisters. James Mitchell would be proud. The mention of James from Daniel's lips visibly startled Walter. For a moment, something like uncertainty crossed his features, quickly replaced by renewed hostility. You never knew my son, Indian. Don't presume to speak for him. Daniel inclined his head slightly, accepting the rebuke without argument, but his eyes never left Walter's face. A father's wish is known by the seeds he plants, he said simply. This land, these children, the woman he chose, the word struck with uncanny precision. Sarah knew that James had indeed defied his parents by marrying her, a penniless schoolteacher with no social connections. His decision to homestead, rather than join the family store, had further strained the relationship, a strain that had never healed before his death. Sheriff Collins, clearly eager to end the increasingly tense confrontation, touched the brim of his hat. Mrs. Mitchell, you'll need to appear at the hearing. Bring any witnesses who can speak to your fitness as a guardian. Witnesses? Sarah repeated, momentarily bewildered. Most of her friends in town had gradually withdrawn after James's death, intimidated by the Mitchells' influence. Who would testify against Walter Mitchell in his own community? I will go, Daniel said, his deep voice cutting through her rising panic. Tell what I have seen here. Walter laughed harshly. An Indian's testimony, worth less than nothing in a white man's court. Nevertheless, I will speak, Daniel replied, unperturbed by the dismissal. Agatha's thin lips curved in a cold smile. By all means, bring your friend to court, Sarah. It will only reinforce our concerns about your judgment. The subtle threat wasn't lost on Sarah. She squared her shoulders, gathering her dignity around her like armor. We'll see you at the hearing, she said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have preparations for winter to complete. As the unwelcome visitors remounted and departed, Sarah remained on the porch, her body rigid with suppressed emotion. Only when they disappeared from view did she allow her shoulders to slump, her hand reaching blindly for the porch post to steady herself. Mama? Thomas asked, his voice small with worry. They can't really take us away, can they? Sarah drew, her son close, including her daughters in the embrace. No, sweetheart, I won't let that happen. The promise felt hollow, even as she made it. The reality of her powerlessness against the Mitchells' influence settling like ice in her veins. Daniel remained a few paces away, his expression unreadable as he watched the family huddle together. When Sarah finally met his gaze, she saw not pity but resolve, a silent commitment that sent an unexpected wave of strength through her own faltering spirit. What will we do? She asked quietly, after sending the children inside. Daniel looked to the northwest, where heavy clouds were building over the mountains. First, prepare for storm, he said practically. Snow comes tonight. Heavy. The shift to immediate concerns was oddly steadying. Sarah followed his gaze, recognizing the telltale darkness that presaged a major snowfall. And then we fight, Daniel replied simply. Not with weapons. He touched his temple. With this, law has power, even against men like Mitchell. You, Know about white man's law? Sarah asked, surprised. A shadow crossed Daniel's face. Learned much at Carlisle, including how law protects some, not others. He hesitated, then added, had a wife, remember? Needed to understand laws about land, property. The reference to his lost family was rare. Daniel seldom spoke of his past. Sarah felt the weight of shared experience between them, two people who had built lives only to see them shattered by death. The Mitchells have money, influence, she said, voicing her greatest fear. The judge will likely be their friend, or at least sympathetic to their standing in the community. Perhaps, Daniel agreed, but mothers have rights too. We will find a way. The simple "we" expanded in Sarah's chest, a warmth against the November chill. For months she had faced her struggles alone, carrying the weight of her children's futures on her shoulders without support or counsel. Now somehow this quiet man, with his own burden of grief, had aligned his path with hers. As the first snowflakes began to fall, gentle harbingers of the storm to come, Sarah and Daniel worked side by side, securing the homestead against winter's first serious assault. By nightfall, when the storm struck in earnest, they had done all they could to prepare. What neither could prepare for was how the blizzard would isolate them completely for the next 3 weeks, cutting off access to town and creating a fragile, separate world where their unlikely alliance would deepen in ways neither could have anticipated. The blizzard descended with primal fury, transforming the Montana landscape into an undulating sea of white. Wind howled around the cabin corners, finding every minute crack despite Daniel's careful preparations. For 3 days, the storm raged unabated, confining the family indoors as snowdrifts climbed past the windowsills and rendered the door nearly impassable. On the 4th morning, Sarah awoke to silence, the peculiar, absolute quiet that follows a major snowfall. Sunlight streamed through frost-etched windows, casting prismatic patterns across the cabin floor. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the children still slumbering in the second room, and kindled the fire from banked embers. The snowfall measured, nearly 4 feet deep in places, with drifts twice that height against the north side of the cabin. Getting to the barn would require tunneling rather than walking. Sarah pulled on James's old coat, preparing to attempt the journey to check on Bessie and the chickens, when a sharp knock at the door startled her. Daniel stood on the threshold, snow crusting his shoulders and hair. Behind him, she could see a cleared path leading from her cabin to the barn, and another trailing off toward his own shelter. "Animals are fed," he reported, stamping snow from his moccasins before entering. "Path will need clearing again before nightfall. More snow coming." The simple practicality of his assistance touched Sarah deeply. "You've been up for hours," she observed, noting the redness of his hands despite the heavy mittens he wore. Daniel shrugged, moving to warm himself by the fire. "Winter requires early rising." Sarah busied herself preparing coffee, acutely aware of his presence in the small cabin. During the months of his residence on her property, Daniel had maintained a careful distance, never entering the main cabin except for meals taken with the family or evening gatherings around the fire. This morning visit, necessitated by the storm, shifted their established boundaries in subtle ways that made Sarah simultaneously uneasy and somehow comforted. "The children will be disappointed to be confined indoors," she remarked, handing him a steaming cup. Daniel accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Not confined. Snow is opportunity, not prison." At Sarah's questioning look, he elaborated, "We'll teach Thomas snow shelters later. Important skill. Emma can learn rabbit tracking. Even Lily can. Help pack trail to barn." The planned activities revealed how thoroughly Daniel had integrated himself into their family rhythms, anticipating each child's needs and capabilities in ways that still occasionally startled Sarah. More surprising, was how natural it felt, this sharing of parental responsibilities that had developed so gradually she'd hardly noticed its evolution. "You're good with them," she said softly, watching his profile in the firelight. Patient, kind. Something flickered across Daniel's face, a shadow of remembered pain quickly controlled. "Had a son," he replied simply. "Michael. Would be Thomas's. Age now." The rare mention of his child opened a door Sarah had been reluctant to approach. "Tell me about him," she invited gently. "About your family." Daniel stared into the flames for so long that Sarah thought he might refuse. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a depth of emotion she'd never heard from him before. "Wife's name was Rebecca. Schoolteacher, like you. Met at Carlisle when I returned to visit after graduation." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She taught English to younger students, had no fear, called me Mr. Hunter for 6 months before accepting courtship." Sarah tried to imagine the woman who had crossed racial boundaries to marry a Cheyenne man. The courage and independence such a choice would have required in a world that condemned such unions. "Her family," she prompted softly. "Disowned her," Daniel replied without self-pity. "Except younger brother, he helped us start ranch in Wyoming. Good land, fertile valley, built cabin myself, larger than this one." His gaze swept the humble space. "2 rooms for us, one for Michael when he came." The pride in his voice as he described their homestead revealed a depth of loss beyond mere death, the destruction of a future carefully constructed through years of labor and love. "What happened?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the ending, if not the details. "Influenza. Winter of '88. Daniel's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "Remote location, no doctor within 50 miles. Rebecca fell ill first. Then Michael. Tried everything. Traditional medicines, treatments learned from white doctors. Nothing worked." Sarah moved instinctively closer, her own grief resonating with his. "I'm so sorry," she said, the inadequate words all anyone could offer in the face of such loss. Daniel nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "After burying them, I returned to Cheyenne territory, sought healing among my mother's people." His expression darkened. "Found only strangers, too many years away, too white in thinking, not Cheyenne enough." "So you've been wandering since then," Sarah surmised, understanding now his rootlessness, his careful distance. 3 years, moving between worlds, belonging. "Unto neither." He met her gaze directly. "Until this place." The simple statement carried implications that quickened Sarah's pulse. Before she could respond, the bedroom door creaked open, and Lily appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her nightgown rumpled. "Mr. Hunter!" she exclaimed with delight, rushing to throw her arms around his legs. "Did you see the snow? It's higher than the windows." Daniel's demeanor transformed instantly, his stoic expression warming as he lifted the child. "Yes, little one. Good snow for playing today." Within the hour, all 3 children were bundled into every available layer of clothing, their excitement at the snow's possibilities overriding any fears about the Mitchells' threats. Daniel led them outside, showing Thomas how to pack snow for fort building while teaching Emma to identify the nearly invisible depressions that indicated rabbit runs. Beneath the snow's surface, Sarah watched from the doorway, a peculiar ache in her chest. The scene before her, a man patiently guiding her children through winter's lessons, was one she had imagined countless times with James. That it was now Daniel fulfilling this role stirred emotions too complex to easily name. The day unfolded. In a rhythm dictated by practical necessities and simple pleasures, they cleared paths between buildings, checked on livestock, and brought in additional firewood. Daniel showed the children how to fashion snow lanterns by packing snow around candles, creating magical luminaria that lined the path to the barn. By evening, exhausted from their exertions in the deep snow, the children fell asleep earlier than usual, leaving Sarah and Daniel alone by the fire. The intimacy of the moment, snowbound in the isolated cabin the rest of the world held at bay by impassable drifts, created a space for conversations usually left unspoken. "December 15th will come quickly," Sarah said, voicing the concern that never fully left her thoughts. "We have less than a month to prepare for the hearing." Daniel nodded, his attention on the knife and piece of wood in his hands. He had been carving throughout the evening, a small figure gradually taking shape beneath his skillful fingers. "Need witnesses," he agreed. "People who will speak against the Mitchells." "That's just it," Sarah sighed, frustration evident in her voice. "Who would dare? Walter controls most of the business in Blackwater. Cross him, and suddenly your line of credit disappears, or your shipments get misplaced." "Not everyone fears him," Daniel observed mildly. "Sheriff seemed fair-minded, uncomfortable with their claims." "Sheriff Collins is a good man," Sarah conceded, "but his testimony alone won't be enough against the Mitchells' influence." Daniel's knife paused in its work. "The Burke family?" Sarah stared at him in astonishment. "The Burkes! They're practically at war with us. Caleb threatened you at gunpoint." "Young men act without thinking," Daniel replied with unexpected charity. "But Logan Burke, he is not friends with Mitchell. Old dispute over water rights, yes?" The observation demonstrated how carefully Daniel had been piecing together the community's dynamics from fragments of conversation and observation. Sarah nodded slowly, considering the possibility. "There was a significant disagreement 5 years ago," she confirmed. "James mentioned that Walter tried to divert a creek that runs through both properties. Logan Burke brought in lawyers from Helena. It got ugly." "Enemies of enemies," Daniel suggested, his knife resuming its careful work. "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged, though the prospect of approaching the Burke family for support seemed far-fetched at best. "But Logan made his feelings about your presence quite clear." Daniel's expression remained thoughtful. "Man can dislike me, but still speak truth about Mitchell's character. For justice." The strategy revealed a sophisticated understanding of human nature and legal maneuvering that again reminded Sarah how much lay beneath Daniel's quiet exterior. His time at Carlisle, his years managing his own ranch, his navigation of the complex racial boundaries of frontier society, all had equipped him with insights she might otherwise have overlooked. "There's also Reverend Phillips," she mused, following this new line of thinking. "He and Walter had a significant disagreement last year over church finances. The Reverend wanted transparency. Walter preferred discretion." "Good," Daniel nodded, approvingly. "Churchman carries weight with judge." As they continued strategizing, the dynamics between them shifted subtly. No longer merely protector and protected, they had become partners in a common cause, their shared goal of safeguarding the children, bridging cultural divides and personal reservations. Later, as Daniel prepared to make his way back to his own cabin through the snow, Sarah handed him a bundle of food she'd prepared. "There's something else we need to consider," she said hesitantly. "The Mitchells' primary objection, beyond our isolated location, is your presence here." Daniel nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "I understand. If you left before the hearing," Sarah continued reluctantly, "their argument would be weakened. They couldn't claim impropriety or unsuitable influence." The suggestion hung between them, pragmatic but painful. Daniel studied her face carefully, reading the conflict there. "Is that what you want?" he asked simply. Sarah met his gaze directly. "No," she admitted, surprising herself with the certainty of her answer. "The children need you." She faltered, then finished more carefully. "We all benefit from your presence." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "Then I stay. We find another way. He held out the carved figure he'd been working on throughout the evening. A delicately rendered wolf, alert and protective. For you, he said quietly. Winter wolves protect their own. Sarah accepted the gift, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. Thank you, she whispered, the words encompassing far more than the carving. As Daniel disappeared into the snowy night, returning to his solitary cabin, Sarah remained in the doorway, clutching the wooden wolf. The figurine embodied something essential about the man who had crafted it, strength tempered by gentleness, wildness disciplined by purpose. She finally acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. Her feelings for Daniel Hunter had evolved far beyond gratitude or practical alliance. The realization terrified her, not just because of the societal barriers or the custody implications, but because opening her heart again meant risking the devastating loss she'd experienced with James's death. The blizzard that had isolated them from the outside world had simultaneously removed the distractions that had allowed Sarah to ignore the growing attachment. Now, holding the carved wolf in her palm, she faced a future more complex and uncertain than she'd imagined, one where the battle for her children was inextricably intertwined with her deepening connection to a man who walked between worlds. The snow continued falling softly outside, sealing them in a temporary sanctuary where possibilities too fragile for the harsh judgment of society could be contemplated. But Sarah knew the thaw would eventually come, bringing with it the reckoning they could not indefinitely postpone. The snow finally relented after a week of isolation, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and ice crystal beauty. With the break in the weather came the necessity of venturing into town for supplies, a journey Sarah had been dreading since the Mitchells' visit. "I'll go alone," she insisted, hitching the horses to the sleigh while Daniel loaded wooden runners. Onto the wagon bed. The children should stay here, away from town gossip. Daniel paused in his work, assessing her with those perceptive dark eyes. Not safe. Trail still dangerous. "I've managed difficult drives before," Sarah countered, checking the harnesses with deliberate focus to avoid his gaze. "Not about your skill," Daniel corrected quietly. "About Burke's, Mitchell's. Better not to be alone." The logic was irrefutable, yet Sarah hesitated. Every instinct warned against the two of them appearing in Blackwater together, giving the Mitchells more ammunition for their custody petition. Thomas appeared from the barn, leading Bessie out for her morning milking. Watching. Her son, noting the new confidence in his bearing, his growing resemblance to James, Sarah made her decision. "We'll all go," she announced, surprising both Daniel and herself, "the entire family together. I won't have the children hidden away as if there's something shameful about our arrangement." Daniel's expression revealed nothing, but Sarah detected approval in the slight nod he gave before returning to his task. The deliberate inclusion of him in family hadn't gone unnoticed. The journey to Blackwater took twice as long as usual, the sleigh runners carving parallel tracks through virgins. Snow. Though bitterly cold, the day was gloriously clear, the sky an impossible blue canopy above the white expanse. The children's excitement at the expedition, their first real outing in weeks, bubbled over in songs and games that transformed the difficult travel into an adventure. Sarah observed how naturally Daniel participated in their play, crafting elaborately silly stories that had even Thomas laughing unreservedly. The boy had appointed himself co-driver, sitting proudly beside Daniel on the front bench, while Sarah and the girls huddled beneath buffalo robes in the sleigh bed. Their arrival in Blackwater created the stir Sarah had anticipated. Heads turned as the unusual party made their way down Main Street. A young widow, 3 children, and a Cheyenne man driving the sleigh with casual competence. Conversations faltered, resuming in urgent whispers as they passed. People are staring. Emma observed loudly. Yes, Sarah agreed, seeing no benefit in pretending otherwise. Remember what we discussed about holding our heads high? Emma nodded solemnly. Because we're not doing anything wrong. Exactly, Sarah affirmed, though her own confidence wavered as they approached Mitchell's general store. She had debated visiting a different establishment, but practical necessity prevailed. Only the Mitchells carried the full range of supplies they needed. Daniel pulled the sleigh to a stop before the store. "I'll secure horses," he said, clearly intending to remain outside. "No," Sarah decided suddenly. "We shop together, all of us." The look that passed between them conveyed volumes. Her determination to present a united front, his concern about exacerbating tensions, and beneath it all, a deepening trust that transcended their differences. The bell above the store door announced their entrance with cheerful incongruity. Inside, perhaps a dozen customers browsed the shelves or clustered near the stove where coffee percolated invitingly. All conversation ceased abruptly. Walter Mitchell stood behind the counter, his expression darkening at the sight of Daniel accompanying his family. Agatha emerged from the storeroom, a ledger in her thin hands, her shock quickly masked by cold. Disapproval. "Good morning," Sarah greeted them with deliberate normalcy, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "We need supplies after the storm." Walter's gaze moved from Sarah to Daniel, who stood slightly behind her, his posture relaxed but vigilant. "I see your situation continues," he observed acidly. "Yes, Mr. Hunter has been invaluable during the blizzard," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly through the unnaturally quiet store. "We wouldn't have managed nearly so well without him." The children, sensing the tension, moved closer to the adults. Thomas positioned himself protectively near his sisters, while Lily, oblivious to the undercurrents, gazed longingly at a display of rock candy near the counter. "Perhaps we could complete our business efficiently," Sarah suggested, handing Walter a list of necessities. "We have several more stops to make in town." Walter made no move to take the list. "I'm afraid we can't serve you today," he said with false regret. "Certain customers have expressed discomfort with mixed company in the store." The deliberate humiliation burned through Sarah like wildfire. She opened her mouth to respond when a deep voice from near the stove interrupted. "That's the biggest load of horse shit I've ever heard, Mitchell." Logan Burke pushed away from the wall, where he'd been observing, his imposing frame commanding attention as he strode toward the counter. Despite his harsh words, his manner remained calm, almost conversational. "These folks are paying customers same as anyone," he continued, stopping beside Sarah. "And last I checked, you don't have the authority to turn away business based on personal grudges." Walter's face flushed an ugly red. "This is my establishment, Burke. I decide who shops here. Public store with a territorial license," Logan countered smoothly. "Obligated to serve all customers unless they're causing a disturbance." He glanced meaningfully around the quiet store. "Don't see any disturbance here, do you, Sheriff?" Sheriff Collins, previously unnoticed at the far end of the counter, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Stores required to serve all peaceable customers, Walter. That's the law." The unexpected support from Logan Burke, a man who had himself expressed hostility toward Daniel's presence, left Sarah momentarily speechless. She glanced at Daniel, who appeared equally surprised, though he masked it better. Walter glared at Logan with undisguised loathing. "Always one to challenge authority, aren't you, Burke? First the water rights, now this." "Not challenging authority," Logan replied easily. "Just making sure it's not abused." He turned to Sarah, his weathered face softening slightly. "Mrs. Mitchell, I believe my wife is holding some correspondence for you at the post office. Might want to collect it while you're in town." The cryptic message clearly contained significance beyond its surface meaning. Sarah nodded her thanks, her assessment of the situation rapidly shifting. Something had changed in the town's dynamics. During their isolation, alliances forming or realigning beyond her knowledge. Under the combined pressure of public scrutiny and the sheriff's confirmation of legal obligation, Walter begrudgingly filled Sarah's order. The process took twice as long as necessary, each item calculated with exaggerated precision, while Agatha watched from nearby, her disapproval radiating like a physical force. Throughout the tense transaction, Daniel remained a steady presence. Beside Sarah, neither retreating from the hostile atmosphere nor reacting to the barely concealed insults Walter muttered during his work. Only when Lily began to fidget restlessly did Daniel kneel to her level, producing a small carved toy from his pocket, a miniature horse that fit perfectly in her small palm. The simple, gentle gesture, so at odds with the savage Walter had insinuated, wasn't lost on the observing customers. Sarah noticed several women exchanging glances, their expressions softening as they watched the interaction. When their purchases were finally secured, Logan Burke accompanied them outside, easily lifting the heaviest bags into the sleigh despite his 60-plus years. Only when they were out of earshot of the store did he speak directly to Daniel. "Henderson boy mentioned you helped free their milk cow when she got caught in that bramble patch last month," he said, conversationally. "Said you refused payment." Daniel nodded once, offering no explanation for his assistance to a family who had previously shown him no kindness. "Boy also said you taught him how to splint his dog's leg when it got hurt." Logan studied Daniel with shrewd assessment. Not typical behavior from someone with ill intentions toward the community. "Mr. Hunter has been nothing but helpful to everyone he encounters," Sarah affirmed, curiosity about this unexpected shift in Burke's attitude warring with caution. Logan nodded thoughtfully. "My Caleb was out of line approaching your property armed. Boy needs to learn restraint." His direct acknowledgement of his son's threatening behavior suggested an apology without quite delivering one. "You handled it better than most would have." Daniel accepted the oblique commendation with characteristic reserve. Young men make mistakes, no harm done. Logan's weathered face creased in something approximating a smile. "My wife suggests you stop by our ranch before heading home, north edge of town. Says she'd like to discuss something with Mrs. Mitchell." With that cryptic invitation, he touched his hat brim and strode back toward the store. "What just happened?" Sarah murmured as they loaded the last of their supplies. "Alliance forming," Daniel replied quietly, helping Lily into the sleigh. Enemy of enemy, the Burke Ranch stood in stark contrast to Sarah's modest homestead, a sprawling two-story house with painted trim, substantial barns, and well-maintained corrals where premium horses stamped restlessly in the snow. As Daniel guided their sleigh up the long drive, Sarah fought down a flicker of intimidation at the prosperity on display. Eleanor Burke awaited them on the wide front porch, a tall, silver-haired woman whose dignified bearing reminded Sarah of the Virginia aristocracy she'd occasionally encountered as a young teacher in the East. Despite the cold, Mrs. Burke wore only a light shawl over her dark blue dress, suggesting a brief wait rather than a prolonged vigil. "Mrs. Mitchell," she called as the sleigh approached, "we're delighted you accepted our invitation. Please bring the children inside to warm themselves." The welcome seemed genuine, though Sarah maintained a cautious reserve as she helped the children from the sleigh. Daniel remained seated, clearly assuming he would wait with the horses. "Mr. Hunter," Eleanor Burke addressed him directly, "you're welcome as well. My husband speaks highly of your handling of a difficult situation with our son." The deliberate inclusion, so different from the reception at the general store, visibly surprised Daniel. After a moment's hesitation, he secured the reins and followed Sarah toward the house. The Burke home's interior reflected the same prosperity as its exterior. Polished wood floors, quality furnishings, and the unmistakable touches of Eastern refinement in the artwork and draperies. A blazing fire in the main parlor offered welcome warmth after their cold journey. "The children can play in the kitchen if they'd like," Eleanor suggested, gesturing toward a doorway from which enticing smells emerged. My cook just finished a batch of molasses cookies. With minimal encouragement, Emma and Lily hurried toward the promised treats. Thomas hesitated, glancing at Sarah for permission before following his sisters. His protective instincts had been heightened since the Mitchells' threats, his boyish understanding of danger more acute than Sarah would have wished. Once the children were settled, Eleanor led Sarah and Daniel to a private study where Logan, Burke waited, along with a thin, scholarly-looking man Sarah recognized as Judge Wilson from the territorial court in Helena. "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge greeted her, rising politely. "I understand you're facing a challenging legal situation." Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face, for Eleanor quickly explained, "Judge Wilson is my cousin, visiting for the holidays. When we learned of the Mitchells' petition, I took the liberty of discussing the general circumstances with him." Thus her unexpected connection to legal authority, particularly one that might counterbalance the Mitchells' influence, left Sarah momentarily speechless. Daniel remained silent beside her, his presence steady but unobtrusive. "Mrs. Mitchell, Judge," Wilson continued gently, "I should clarify that I won't be hearing your case personally. That falls to Judge Harmon. But I'm familiar with the legal principles involved and thought some advance guidance might prove helpful." "That's very kind," Sarah managed, still struggling to understand why the Burkes would involve themselves in her affairs. "But I confess, I'm confused about your interest in my situation." Logan and Eleanor exchanged glances loaded with unspoken communication. Finally, Logan spoke, his usual bluntness tempered by something that might have been embarrassment. "The Mitchells have been consolidating power in this community for years," he explained. "Driving out smaller businesses, manipulating property, transactions using the church for social control." He shook his head in disgust. "Your husband was one of the few who stood against them, refused to sell your homestead when Walter tried to expand his holdings eastward." "James never mentioned that," Sarah said, surprised. "He wouldn't have," Eleanor interjected smoothly. "He was a proud man, protective of your peace of mind, but he understood Walter's methods better than most." The revelation cast her late husband in yet another light, not just the loving family man she'd known, but a quiet resistor against his father's less savory business practices. "What the Mitchells are attempting with your children isn't just wrong," Logan continued. "It's part of a pattern. They've used similar tactics against other families who crossed them, threatening custody challenges, foreclosures, ruined reputations." "We've watched from the sidelines too long," Eleanor added, her refined manner belying the steel in her voice. "When Logan described your situation, a widowed mother fighting to keep her children, with the community turning against her due to Mitchell influence, we decided it was time to take a stand." "And Mr. Hunter's presence?" Sarah asked carefully, glancing at Daniel, who had remained characteristically quiet throughout the exchange. Eleanor's gaze moved to Daniel, assessing him with intelligent eyes. "Initially, we shared the community's concerns, an unmarried Cheyenne man living in close proximity to a vulnerable widow." Her expression softened. "But multiple reports from neighbors, the Hendersons, the Miller boys, even Reverend Phillips, suggested a very different character than town gossip would have us believe. A man who helps without expectation of return," Logan added gruffly, "who treats children with kindness and respect, who had the restraint not to put a bullet in my hot-headed son when many would have been justified in doing so." Daniel acknowledged this assessment with a slight inclination of his head, neither accepting the praise nor rejecting it. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've reviewed similar cases in territorial courts. While the Mitchells' petition cites legitimate concerns about your isolated location and limited resources, their insinuations about moral impropriety based solely on Mr. Hunter's presence would be considered speculative at best by most judges. The real issue," he continued, will be demonstrating that your children receive adequate care, education, and moral guidance in their current situation. The Mitchells can offer material advantages you cannot: proximity to school, church, social connections. My children are well cared for, Sarah stated firmly. They're learning, growing, developing strong character. I don't doubt it, the judge assured her. But you'll need witnesses to affirm that fact. Credible community members whose testimony can counterbalance the Mitchells' claims. Eleanor leaned forward, her purpose finally revealed. That's why we've invited several respected families to dinner here tomorrow evening. People who might be willing to speak on your behalf, if properly approached. The orchestrated support, so unexpected after months of increasing isolation, brought a lump to Sarah's throat that she struggled to control. Why would you do this? Oh, for us, she asked, the question directed primarily at Eleanor. The older woman's composure faltered slightly. Because 20 years ago I faced a similar threat to my family, she admitted quietly. Before we had the ranch, the means to defend ourselves. I know what it is to fear losing your children to those with more power and influence. The personal revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of the situation. This wasn't merely about opposing the Mitchells, but about Eleanor Burke's empathy born from similar experience. As they discussed specific strategies for the upcoming hearing, Sarah became aware of Daniel's careful attention. Though he spoke rarely, his observations when offered were incisive, revealing a sophisticated understanding of legal proceedings that again reminded her how much depth lay beneath his reserved exterior. By the time they prepared to depart, laden with additional provisions Eleanor insisted they accept, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since the Mitchells' threatening visit: genuine hope that she might win the battle for her children. As Daniel helped her into the sleigh, his hand steady beneath her elbow, he spoke quietly for her ears alone. You are not alone now. The simple statement encompassed everything that had changed, not just the unexpected alliance with the influential Burke family, but the deeper partnership that had formed between them through shared purpose and growing trust. The path ahead remained fraught with challenges, but as they began the journey home through the snow-covered landscape, Sarah allowed herself to believe that perhaps against all odds they might forge a victory from what had seemed certain defeat. The Helena courthouse stood imposing against the December sky, its red brick facade dusted with fresh snow. Sarah paused at the base of the steps, drawing a steadying breath. The children stood beside her in their Sunday best, Thomas in his father's altered suit, Emma and Lily in matching blue dresses with white pinafores. Remember what we discussed, Sarah told them quietly. Answer honestly. There's no need to be afraid. Behind them gathered their unexpected allies, the Burkes, Reverend Phillips, the Henderson family, and several other Blackwater residents. Their presence formed a physical counterweight to the Mitchells' influence, demonstrating that Walter's power was not absolute. Daniel stood slightly apart, transformed in a well-tailored black suit with his long hair neatly tied back. Only his. Bearing remained unchanged, that quiet dignity and watchful alertness that had become so familiar to Sarah. Inside, the Mitchells waited at the front. Walter resplendent in an expensive suit, Agatha severe in black silk, their lawyer shuffling, papers with officious importance. When Sarah's party entered, Walter's expression darkened at the sight of the unexpected assembly supporting his former daughter-in-law. Judge Harmon began the proceedings, a thin, ascetic man with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for impartiality. This is a hearing regarding the guardianship petition filed by Walter and Agatha Mitchell concerning the minor children Thomas, Emma, and Lily Mitchell. The Mitchells presented their case first. Their lawyer outlined their concerns with practiced eloquence: the isolated homestead, limited educational opportunities, financial precariousness, and most pointedly, the morally questionable arrangement. With Daniel Hunter, the children's grandparents can provide advantages Mrs. Mitchell simply cannot, he concluded. A proper home, schooling, church, and the social standing that is their birthright as Mitchells. Walter portrayed himself as a concerned grandfather determined to honor his son's legacy. James would be heartbroken to see his children raised in such circumstances, he declared with well-timed emotion, isolated from civilization and exposed to influences that contradict everything he valued. When it was Sarah's turn, her lawyer established her devotion as a mother, her careful management of resources, and the educational program she had implemented. Reverend Phillips testified to Sarah's moral character and the children's spiritual education. Logan Burke spoke to the homestead's viability, having inspected it personally. Eleanor Burke addressed the social concerns, her aristocratic bearing lending weight to her testimony. When Walter's lawyer called Daniel to testify, a murmur ran through the courtroom. "Mr. Hunter," he began, the courtesy title delivered with subtle mockery, "what exactly is your relationship to Mrs. Mitchell and her children?" Daniel met the lawyer's gaze directly. "I help with the homestead, teach the boy what his father would have taught him, ensure their safety through winter." "And your background, your education at the Indian school prepared you for this role as surrogate father. Carlisle School taught reading, writing, mathematics. Ranch work taught practical skills. Cheyenne upbringing taught respect for family, for children." "Ah, yes, the Cheyenne," the lawyer seized on the opening. "The same tribe involved in numerous conflicts with settlers?" Sarah's lawyer objected immediately, and Judge Harmon sustained it, his gaze sharpening. "Counsel will restrict questioning to matters directly relevant to the children's welfare." "Have you ever been married?" the lawyer pressed. "Yes. Wife and son died of influenza 3 years ago." The simple statement created a palpable shift in the courtroom's atmosphere, the human tragedy behind Daniel's stoic exterior suddenly apparent. "I'd like to speak with the children privately," Judge Harmon announced. The waiting was excruciating. Nearly an hour passed before the children returned, and the judge resumed his position. "I've heard extensive testimony regarding the welfare of these children," he began. "The petitioners offer certain concrete benefits: proximity to formal education, financial resources, and social standing. These are not insignificant considerations." Walter straightened, a smile beginning to form. "However," the judge continued, "the children's own testimony revealed concerning elements about the proposed arrangement. They described limited previous contact with their grandparents, strong attachment to their current home, and distress at the prospect of separation from their mother." He turned to Daniel. Regarding Mr. Hunter's presence, the children described him as a teacher of essential skills, a source of security, and a respectful custodian of their father's memory. Most compelling was Thomas's statement that Mr. Hunter makes sure we remember our pa, not replace him. The judge set aside his notes. "The court finds insufficient grounds to override maternal custody. The petition is denied. Mrs. Mitchell will retain full guardianship of her children." Relief flooded through Sarah. Beside her, Daniel remained outwardly calm, though she detected the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "However," the judge added, "Mrs. Mitchell will bring the children to town weekly for educational assessment. Mr. Hunter's residence may continue, provided the separate living arrangements are maintained." Walter rose abruptly, flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. We'll appeal to a higher court." "That is your right," Judge Harmon acknowledged calmly, "though appellate judges typically defer to lower court judgments unless procedural errors can be demonstrated." Outside the courthouse, snow had begun falling again. Sarah noticed Walter and Agatha standing beside their carriage and approached them, aware of Daniel and the children following behind. "The children would benefit from knowing their grandparents," she said directly. If you can accept the court's decision, you would be welcome to visit occasionally. The olive branch clearly surprised the Mitchells. Walter's expression remained hard, but Agatha's features softened as her gaze moved to the children. Perhaps after the winter, Agatha said finally. As they prepared for the journey home, Daniel worked alongside Sarah with comfortable familiarity. Their hands brushed occasionally, these brief contacts no longer awkward but welcome. "What happens now?" Sarah asked quietly, when the children were settled in the sleigh. "Winter first," he said practically. "Keep everyone safe, warm, then spring. And you, will you stay beyond winter?" Daniel's gaze moved from her to the children. "Have not belonged anywhere since losing my family, but here feels like purpose again." "Then stay," she said simply. "Not just for winter. Stay and help me raise them. They need you. We need you." "Society will not accept," he reminded her gently. "Mixed marriage brings difficulty." "Society has already judged us and found us worthy of defense, despite everything." Daniel's expression remained grave, though hope flickered in his eyes. "Need time, to be certain, for both of us." "Time we have," she agreed. "A whole winter ahead and spring beyond it." Thomas leaned forward from the back of the sleigh. "Mr. Hunter, will you teach me to build an ice fishing shelter? Pa always said he would, but—" "Yes," Daniel replied, his voice warming. "We'll teach you everything your father would have. This I promise." Sarah rested her hand lightly on Daniel's arm. He glanced down at her touch, something profound passing between them, not just affection, but recognition of the journey that had brought them together and the path that stretched before them. As they traveled homeward through the falling snow, the children singing softly, Sarah and Daniel faced forward, toward the future they would build together with patience, respect, and the quiet love that had grown between them against all odds. The Cheyenne warrior had found his family. The young widow had found her protector, and together they had discovered that sometimes family is what you create through courage, loyalty, and the willingness to see beyond differences to the heart beneath. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.